This week on Snark Squad Pod, Nick Jenkins and Rich Camelucci return to finish our MCU series with Avengers Endgame. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. I'm Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marinez, and this week we're joined by Rich Camelucci and Nick Jenkins.
Hey, I'm Rich Camelucci. I am president and founder of Arcade Audio, which we're launching a new role-playing game podcast called Lakeshore and Limbo, available May 6th.
And I'm Nick Jenkins, host of the podcast Real Bad Pod, where we talk about bad movies and why they want to hurt us, and a producer for Complexly.
This week we are finishing off our multiple episode series on the MCU. Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we're finishing it for now with Avengers Endgame. And this is the part where I would do the plot synopsis. But because it is now kind of tradition, we are going to do it 60-second plot dump style because that's what Nick does on his podcast. And I'm actually throwing it over to Nick. Just one more time, Nick, if you will.
You got it. Somebody got a timer?
3, 2, 1, go.
Time travel. That's it.
Okay.
How are the Avengers going to solve the problem? Time travel. And then they solve the problem.
Yeah.
And yeah. I would like to make this more complicated than it actually is, but that's really like, you're wondering how are they going to do it? They go back in time, they get the Infinity Stones, and they solve the problem.
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
It's a time heist. You leave out the delightful word that they give it in the movie, which is it's a time heist, which I think is charming and very Ant-Man. But we'll get to that. I think yes, that'll play. I will let you leave it at that. All right. So really quickly, we are going to start where we always start, but this time with a lightning round. Did you like this, Rich?
Yeah. Oh, I'm in the bag for this movie.
Nick.
No.
Mari.
Mostly yes.
Nicole.
I am coming down on the side of 75% loved it and 25% fucking hated it and no middle.
You can think of me as the opposite of that. 25%, hey, that was pretty good, and I enjoyed that. And then 75% of me just being very unhappy and curmudgeonly in the theater.
Okay, cool. Now that we have our characters established, so this is the conclusion to a decade-long 22 movie series, like a sprawling epic of a thing. So on the one hand, as we've made our way through this series, we've had to pack a bunch of movies into an episode, and that's been really hard. And it's cool because now we get to do a whole episode on just one movie, but also this isn't just one movie, right? This is the end of this whole sort of very large chapter. And so I think kind of following in the vein of how we have done these episodes in the past, I think it makes sense to go through this story talking one by one about each of the original Avengers that we met back in Avengers Assemble. Because while there are a ton of other characters, I think in a lot of ways, this is meant to serve as the end of the story for those original 6. And the movie finds interesting ways to kind of sideline the many other characters and tell us that this is ultimately meant to be, for better or worse, the story of those original 6 characters. So this whole thing started with the first Iron Man movie, which was seemed like a one-off movie about an unheard of, a largely unknown superhero who has since been in and had a really strong presence in a lot of the 22 movies that brought us to this point. So what did you guys think of Iron Man's arc in this movie and how this served as the end of his story? I guess it's worth saying too, before we get to that at the end of this movie, Tony Stark is dead, and he makes one last attempt to sort of save the world, and he succeeds, but dies in the process. He also has a child in the sort of 5-year time jump that happens at the beginning of this movie. So he has something kind of new to live and fight for that he didn't before, and this is the end of his hero's journey.
Oh boy, I think I saw a different movie. Oh jeez. No, our track record with Tony Stark on this podcast has been spotty at best. And
our opinions are well documented.
But I was, especially for like the first half of this movie, like when he does get back to Earth, I feel like he starts actually making sound, reasonable decisions as just like a regular human being and not performative as a billionaire genius, of just like, yeah, no, guess what? We're cutting our losses. We're done here. Pepper didn't get snapped. I have a whole new gratitude on everything, and I'm just going to F off by a lake for forever. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. And it's like, oh man. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping you would say. And, but as Tony will be Tony, it's like, oh, shoot, did I just figure out time travel? Well, I can't, can I? Hey, Pepper, tell me what I want to hear. And then there we are. But yeah, I mean, for being the dude that started this whole thing, I'll get to, my own personal reactions later on. I feel like this was a damn fine send off for the character and the actor from the franchise. I'll just leave it at that for now.
I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with the first half thing. When Tony returns to Earth, my big problem was he doesn't make any sense. And it was like a child acting out. It was very, very bizarre to me. It was very weird that he was angry at Steve for leaving when he chased Steve away, and he's the one who didn't make the phone call to get Steve back because of his freaking ego, and now he's yelling at Steve for not being there. And it was not a moment of like, oh, this character is, he's lashing out. It was a moment of like, I feel like the writers are confused about what actually is happening. And so I was immediately off kilter. I love Robert Downey Jr. I think he is a wonderful actor, and I think he did wonderful stuff with this part, even if the movies themselves with Iron Man have left us all a little cold at times. Am I glad he's dead? No. I would, especially after, he's got this cute little girl now, and I wanted to sort of see more of their interactions. But yeah, my reactions to everything within this movie will come later. But as far as Tony, like, I guess it's weird to me. I get the fan service that this is his arc, I guess. But at the same time, I'm like, this is about Tony? Like, so I don't know.
I had a lot of the same reaction, like this is about Tony, which I like. That was while I was watching this movie, I was enjoying it. And then as soon as I stepped out of the theater, it was like an onslaught of things. I was like, but wait this, wait that, wait that. So that's kind of been my experience in the time between watching the movie and now. And one of the first things that I really thought about was the fact that the emotional core of this movie relies on you having feelings for Tony Stark. And I don't, that's weird to say. I'm not happy he's dead either, but I mean, I saw people online describing sobbing reactions, and there were moments I got a little emotional, but I wasn't sobbing. And I think part of it is because right out of the gate, you get classic Tony, in which I'm watching him. I'm like, I literally out loud was like, you douchebag, as I'm watching, because that the whole first thing where he's back, they saved him, and his whole reaction is to throw that tantrum and to blame Captain America, and just everything he was doing. I immediately was like, okay, this is why I don't like that character. Yeah. I will say that they did a very good job of eking out feelings from me by, giving him a family, and the little girl was so cute. And even though Pepper Potts has been done wrong this entire time, she was there and she was getting emotional over it. So it was mostly everybody else's reactions. Yeah.
I want to say real quick, also, just from a filmmaking standpoint and a storytelling, it was a really good death scene.
Yes.
It was it was not something you see every day. It was interesting. And that in and of itself, the filmmaking of it, I think, was really good. But I'm with Mari that I'm trying to work up emotion for this character who I'm almost always at odds with.
See, I will say that I agree in general in that, like, yes, my feelings on Tony Stark are well documented across the 4 previous podcast episodes that we have recorded. And so, like, no, this is not a character whose death I am particularly inclined to be super emotional about in the first place. I also agree that, like, most of the feeling that I got out of that last moment came from Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, when Gwyneth Paltrow starts crying, I'm like, okay, yes. Feelings. But my feelings are more for Pepper than they are for Tony.
I agree with
Pepper now has to raise this child alone. And however, I think that there is something immensely satisfying about it. And this goes back to, what Nick is saying about, like, from a filmmaking perspective. And I think that there is something satisfying about bringing the story around in this way. And I don't know, like, I didn't go into this expecting something like truly shocking. Like, I don't know, like, I don't think, like, this wasn't about having, like, big crazy twists. Like, I expected there to be some very, like, big, okay, and this is how we bring it all, like, full circle. This is how we bring it round. And so I think that there is, while I maybe wasn't as invested in the death of Tony Stark as the film wanted me to be, I do think that there is something very satisfying about taking this story and that, began with the first Iron Man movie and having Tony finally, like, correctly engage in a moment of, like, true self-sacrifice. This character who has been consistently so, like, self-important and wrong all the time. Yeah. Having him engage in this act of true self-sacrifice and having the thing end with his death and, like, bringing all of those characters together. I have other thoughts on the funeral that we'll get to later, but it was very striking to think about how many, like, heavyweight actors they managed to call in for one day to stand there in, like, black clothes.
I'm pretty sure that was all composites. I don't think.
Yeah, sure. Rally them all together. Yeah, together. But you know what I mean? Like, still, like, it's not like this is, like, literally, we just need you to come in and wear your mourning clothes. Yeah. Even, yes, sure. Not all on the same day, but yeah. Regardless, I want to say one thing about your note about Gwyneth Paltrow. In that death scene, I think Pepper Potts has the most. We always talk about, like, superhero movies are, sort of about adult-sized children. And they're sort of for children. And I want to say that in one thing that made me very happy was they gave Pepper Potts possibly the most adult line, an adult moment in the history of any of these movies, where she just looks at Tony in his last moments and says, "We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. You can rest now."
His last moments are exactly letting him know that he can rest and it's okay. That is... Peter Parker comes and does the child thing. He cries and he starts to freak out. Pepper Potts does the adult thing and the kind thing. And that, I think, was meaningful to me.
Yes.
I think that, my whole piece of it, it's very difficult at this point after, as much time as we've invested in all these movies to, like, separate out, like, the baggage that you're bringing in terms of your feelings. So all of my reaction to Tony was a lot of that, like, feeling stuff. But I am with you, Nicole, in the fact that, like, book ending it this way was pretty satisfying, and, like, giving him a proper, like, send off, letting him do the right thing. And then just having that really, really, like, important, like, epic emotional moment of having him say, "I am Iron Man," snap his fingers, and, like, that was, like, the big climax of it all. So I can, like, stand back and see that, but if you're asking me what's in my heart, it's not a lot of love for Iron Man.
Well, that's, I think, what caught me most off guard was... Because, for however long we've been watching these movies, I feel like, not being a comic reader, and I feel like I've had all these things kind of at an arm's length, and it's been fun to kind of delve in and really kind of pick them apart and talk about them with y'all. And then when that happened, and specifically when Pepper comes up and says what she says, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of lost it. And it was like, where is this coming from? What? what do you care? What do you care? And it just kept happening, and I couldn't stop it. And I think it was just like over 10 years of watching this crew, and yeah, I don't know. It was weird, and I couldn't stop it, and I felt safe to do it because everyone around me was, oh my god, I can't wait to get
sobbing.
Yeah, it caught me very off guard how badly I was bawling at that part.
So with all this talk of cries, I'm going to move on to the character who earned the few like honest to goodness tears that I shed in this movie, and that is Captain America, Steve Rogers. Again, my opinions on this character are well documented across the 4 episodes leading up to this moment. But in this movie, this is also the end of Steve's story, and like, you know, we all knew that going in, that Chris Evans's contract was up. And so, you know, somehow or another, this movie was going to find a way to say goodbye to this character. I was fully expecting him to die. And so the fact that this movie, through its sort of, you know, weird, timey-wimey nonsense time travel plot, like manages to say, no, Steve just like went off and actually got to have a life, was, I don't know, really beautiful. So in the time heist, we see Steve go first back to the scene of the first Avengers. So that was really cool. Like, again, Tony and Steve, like, because this is the end of their 2 stories, like, you know, we send them off together and they've always been at odds and yada yada whatever, and then so they go back first to the scene of the first Avengers movie, and then they go further back to the 1970s to a SHIELD headquarters. And then in the big finale, we see confirmation that Steve is in fact worthy of wielding Thor's hammer. So he ends up with Thor's hammer for much of the big finish, and he takes it back with him as he is the one to go and return all 6 of the Infinity Stones to their original locations in time. And while he's doing that, after he puts all the stones back, he's like, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to go and, as he puts it, live that life that Tony's always telling him to find. This is, you know, whereas Tony's story has largely been about like kind of being self-important. Then he has this final moment of self-sacrifice. Steve's story has been like constant self-sacrifice. And his final moment is like, you know, getting to actually go be happy for once. And he returns an old man, and in this otherwise a very white movie passes off his shield to a black man. So like that's a moment that was really wonderful and good. And so yeah, I don't know. What did you guys think about Steve and Captain Rogers and his arc in this movie? I guess I sort of already answered that question for myself.
I think like everything that I'm going to respond to in this movie is that I like the idea. I like the skeleton of it. I like the bones, but I don't like how a lot of it translated to screen, or how a lot of it was translated to screen. I like the idea of Steve getting a life. Like I do. I think that's really great. I love Chris Evans' portrayal of him, and I like what they've done with Cap by and large throughout the entire thing. There are some things in here that just felt rushed and too convenient to me. And as much as, you know, we're proud of some of the de-aging, I didn't like the old Captain America. I don't know. There was something about it that was like really bothersome to me. Not in a way of like, you know, I didn't want to see that. I just would have preferred they cast a different person or something. I don't know. There was something about it was off-putting. I would have preferred they just left a package for Sam that had the shield in it, as opposed to the little conversation they had. So I don't know. I love his arc. I love the actor, and I really love what the Russos have done with everything else dealing with him. But this just felt weird for me.
Maybe they just couldn't get Clint Eastwood on that day, because that's definitely what he was looking like to me. But it was cool. I loved seeing just like, you got this with some other characters as well, but it was fun to see specifically side by side what Cap was and what Cap has turned into these days. And yeah, just kind of like getting fed up with his own shtick. I could do this all day. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I loved that moment. So good.
I hated that moment. I hated it so much. Yeah.
Just give me Chris Evans interacting with Yvette Nicole Brown. Finally, it was fun to see some Community cameos in the movie as well, by the way. Thanks, Russos. Took you long enough.
No, they did it in each one.
Did they do it in each one?
Yeah, Danny Pudi was in Winter Soldier.
Oh, dang.
Member of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there was someone else in Civil War. I'm not remembering who it was.
I need to go back and rewatch them because here's my thing. I only just recently started watching Community, so
So
I got some
a fun Easter egg awaiting
absolutely. Yeah, again, mentioning like that whole scene in the Shield base in the 70s. I had 2 seats over from me. There was a woman that was wearing an Agent Carter shirt, and when he was in the office and you saw Agent Carter like on the other side of the window, I could
That
just
was my
audibly
first cry.
I could audibly hear her like having a moment, and it was like, yes, this is
Mood.
yes.
I really enjoyed his arc. You know, it's really difficult for me because after being invested in these movies, and not even to a level where I would consider myself like a super fan, but this has been like a really interesting experience, and like the cultural moment of it, I think, is a thing that has impacted me the most of all. And so I don't want to not have Captain America, and I don't want to not have Chris Evans as Captain America, but this movie and his arc did a really good job of like getting me to a place where I could accept it, because it showed Cap as so freaking tired. He just seemed so tired. And, you know, when he's on the ground and he's trying to get up with a half broken shield, and it's like him and he like nobody else is around, just trying to lift himself up one more time. Like that was super emotionally impacting for me. Fighting against his own self, where he's like, I can do this all day. And to me, that like, I know it was just another one of those things that like, he's so tired. Like that, you know, it wasn't the same, you know, young man that could do this all day. He's been through a lot, and he has been the person who has been sacrificing over and over again. And even just all the little nods to how positive he is and how he's, you know, we're going to win and all of that. It really got me to a place where I was like, okay, goodbye, Cap. It felt like a really good goodbye for me for that character. And I did appreciate that. Even I don't think it was a cop-out or cheap to let him go live a life and then show back up. It was almost heartbreaking in another kind of way. You know, the logistics over the time travel and all that are another story. Like, I could sit here and pick it apart all day long, but from just like the satisfaction of the story, I enjoyed this arc.
Yeah, I think, yes, that for me is where I come down on it as well. Like, I just found it satisfying. Again, like that's with more emotion now this time than with Tony. It was satisfying, right. And also I had all the correct feelings in the case of Steve. I think I was having a conversation literally earlier today with a family member about he is like big on Iron Man and doesn't care about Captain America, and I would like, my mind was just blown. Like, I acknowledge that these people exist, but having an actual conversation with somebody who was very smart and thoughtful who felt this way was just like rocked my world. But he said something about how like the thing about Captain America is that like he's not flawed, and like that bothered him. But like both in universe and out of universe, the thing about Captain America is that he is the embodiment of like hope and optimism and our better angels. Like he is he's the idea that like we can be good and win the day and whatever. And so the idea that in the end that hope and optimism ultimately is rewarded with like the only thing he ever wanted, but couldn't have because he was good. I don't know, like there was just something really, really beautiful and like lovely about that. And so I'm cool with the time travel, you know, being sort of nonsense, like in order to give Steve that. Like, I don't care. I don't give a shit. I'm just so happy for Steve.
Yeah, it was so perfectly timed too, his final scene, to where like people just started to recover.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, all right, I'm gonna be good. What? No.
No, you're not. Okay, and now we're going to move on to my first major grievance of the movie, Thor. This movie picks up where Infinity War left off. Thor, at the beginning of this movie, they find Thanos. Thanos has already destroyed all the stones, and Thor is ultimately the one to kill Thanos for no real purpose. Thanos is just dead now. And then we jump 5 years into the future, and Thor is hiding out I don't know, drinking and playing video games and like maybe suffering from PTSD, but like not actually dealing with it, his PTSD. He's just playing video games and getting fat that's I don't know. And Thor's role in the time heist is to go back to Asgard, and he runs into his mother while he's there, and his mother realizes that he's from the future, and they have a little bit of a chat, and she's basically like, you know, failure is a thing that happens, like everyone fails. And by the end of the movie, Thor's sort of finishing point is realizing that like he is still worthy and like this failure doesn't undo him. I think that's a fair summary of the intended arc of Thor in this movie. I don't know. What did you guys think of Thor in Endgame?
You know, it's weird because I love watching Chris Hemsworth be funny. Like he is so good at comedy. He has such great timing and everything. Really didn't there's a couple of things that I have a problem with about it. The first one being making a joke out of this PTSD thing is upsetting. Fat shaming also, that like that's all that, like it just kept happening and happening and happening. And you know, as a bigger guy, it's really frustrating to me to be told to my face by a movie that I'm enjoying, you're a joke.
And to literally sit in a theater and listen as your entire theater erupts in laughter as his body is made a joke of repeatedly.
Right. And then on my own, you know, comic booky side, I'm like, I don't picture Thor ever working out. Like Thor is a god.
He's a god.
He didn't work for that. It just happened to him.
Yeah. Like I don't know. There's a lot there. I don't appreciate I love the comedy that Chris Hemsworth can do. I also love that Korg and Meek are back and can have that sort of playfulness. There are ways that you could have dealt with that were not about making fun of PTSD and that were not about fat shaming. And I don't know why they went that route. I really don't. And so it was upsetting to me pretty much through the whole movie.
Yeah, big same on that. Like that was one of the first things that sort of started to set me off. And I think the later thing that was my true source of rage, I was already like, I don't know, queued up because I had the bad feelings from all of Thor's appearances, I think. And it's frustrating because like, so I read this really interesting Vanity Fair piece that I will link in the post. Joanna Robinson wrote about like the headline is Thor's new look more than just a joke? And it includes interviews with Hemsworth on the set of Endgame. And it's interesting to hear some of the like behind the scenes logic of this and how much Hemsworth wanted the role like to become more comedic. And so I get that. And I get and I appreciate the idea of making Thor like funnier and like playing with the idea of who the character is. Like that's like cool and I'm on board with that. And I also don't think that it's impossible to, you know, like laugh at dark things. The problem is, so like there is potentially, I think this is a hard thing to do, but I think you can potentially like give this character PTSD and also like still have him be funny. But the thing is that if you're going to do that, he needs to be the one making the jokes. Right. The problem is that everyone else is making the jokes at his expense. And so it becomes a situation where we're laughing at PTSD and not someone with PTSD using laughter as a catharsis. Yeah. So that's like problem one. I think the maybe easier solution would have been to not give him PTSD. Like I think that would have been actually very interesting. Like I think that would have been difficult to do, but interesting. An easier solution maybe would have been to just like have him be working and like be super instrumental in the building of New Asgard, which is also something I enjoyed. I don't know. I thought it was funny as a bit, the idea of New Asgard. But like have him like working, have him doing, I don't know, but like have him doing something. Everything about I hadn't even thought about the thing that Nick just said, like the idea that Thor is a god. And so I don't know, he's just like preternaturally ripped. But now that you pointed it out, I agree.
Right. Like did you know the old Greek gods work out for those? Right. No, they didn't.
Yeah, so I don't know. It just, everything about the structuring of that story was really disappointing, especially after watching Thor become like such a favorite. It felt like the movie really did him dirty, and I just did not appreciate watching them laugh at him over and over again.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and it felt a lot to me like, you know, the writers or the team on this movie went, remember Ragnarok when Thor was funny? And then they just kind of tried to like duplicate that in a way that really didn't understand where Thor's story was. So the jokes were, yes, all at his expense. And that was really frustrating to watch. And then I feel like they wanted to reset his character a little bit. And so that, I don't know. I don't know if this is the movie where you do that, because everybody else felt like they were getting a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And it's okay if you leave Thor's open-ended because we're going to get more content there, but you don't reset him the way that, I don't know, that it did not feel satisfying to me, where some of the other arcs did. And that's kind of apart from like the missed humor and the fat shaming and all of that. I don't know that I truly understood where Thor was coming from, or his whole like, I don't want to be king anymore. Bye guys. Like all of that. Maybe you could argue that it fits with his storyline, but it didn't feel good to me.
Yeah, I, again, agree with a lot of what's already been said. He's kind of gone back and forth on the whole like wanting to be king thing and stuff like that. But just a couple things that I really did enjoy from his part in this movie. One, I dug his Lebowski steez. There's definitely days where I just kind of want to put on a cardigan and sunglasses and not go outside. And then the whole Captain America and Thor's hammer and that whole thing. I just love that basically took the one good moment in Age of Ultron where Captain America kind of makes it move and Thor freaks out, and turned it into like the biggest pop in the theater that we heard. Like straight up people standing up out of their seats, saluting the screen. People lost their minds. It was just
for
fun.
clarity, Rich went to the first showing. So
oh yeah, 7:30 Thursday night.
People were ready. People were ready to salute this movie.
It was electric.
And unlike the moment in Ultron where he's sort of distressed by it, there is like a little bit of growth from Thor because his reaction isn't excited. I knew it.
Yeah.
And like that's also cool, like as a bit of character growth from A to B.
And also just like happy for my friend. Like, yes, my good friend from work. He can do this too. This is great.
And I also like the handoff later where he says, no, you take the small one. You know, like that's a funny Thor. I like it where it's wrapped up in his ego. Like that's fun.
Yes.
Yeah. And also just to get like out of the two movies that she was in, to get a real movie or a real scene with Rene Russo. That was very nice. And also, if it was indeed her and not just some like old footage from the last one, I hope Natalie Portman got paid more than everyone else on this movie.
I am so confused. Like the way, because like, when I first saw her in there, I'm like, okay, they're hiding her face. It's a stand-in. But then they show her getting up, and I'm like, I think that's B-roll footage from Thor: The Dark World. But then she gets a full credit at the end, and I'm like, I am so fucking confused.
I made a note, like as soon as this movie's over, I'm looking up whether or not she was actually in this movie, and she was at the premiere.
Right, she was at the premiere.
Yeah, so I have no clue, because again, it was just like a fleeting moment. And you didn't even get to see what actually happened.
Yeah, I loved the moment with his mother. Loved is a little bit strong because that moment was also tainted by another like pointless fat joke. Why is his mother telling him he should eat a salad? Like, yikes, gross, disgusting. Also, like, out of character. Like, I don't believe that this woman would make that joke.
No.
Like, it's just, I don't know, it bothered me. But the rest of it, the idea of him getting to have this like closure with his mother, and you know, his mother being the one to tell him, you know, like it's okay to fail. Like that I appreciated.
Yeah. For background, I was also coming off of a way too long weekend spending with my mother, who also has red curly hair. And that is 100% something she would say to me. So
Mom feels.
Frigga, no. Carmen, yes.
That is interesting too, that I enjoyed that scene a lot more than I expected to. Like I was, I still wasn't, in a negative place. Really, I was in a negative place with what they're doing to Thor. But I was like, oh, Rene Russo, they actually gave her something.
Yes,
I love Rene Russo, and I was always sort of I always felt it was very tragic that she didn't get to do much in the 2 Thor movies she was in. And so this was nice. It was a nice scene. And again, when you give Chris Hemsworth a good line, like where he's freaking out and says, "Oh my God, I'm totally from the future." Like that's funny. Like it is funny because he's out of his depth and everything. It's great. You don't have to do what they did.
Yes. Moving on from Thor to Bruce Banner, the Hulk. So in this movie, oh God.
Yeah, good luck with this one.
In the Thanos killing scene, he's in his Hulk suit. When we first find him after the 5 years later time jump, we are introduced to Professor Hulk. So basically, in the 5 years in between, he has channeled his energy into finding a way to integrate Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and so that he has both like the intellect of Bruce Banner and the Hulk smash of the Hulk. And honestly, I think probably some of the best comedic lines, in my opinion, end up being his. Some of the best comedic moments. When we first meet him, it is in a diner and there are some kids coming who want a selfie, and I just everything about that character was there's a lot of the sort of everybody hanging out moments. This movie is packed with them. This is another character that does not appear to be like retiring. Like this is much like Thor was kind of getting a reset moment. This also seems like a little bit of a Hulk reset, right? So that's like this, Professor Hulk, whatever. And so he got a transformation. And so I guess my first question is whether or not you liked that transformation, and also just in general, what did you think of Bruce / the Hulk in this movie?
I loved it. I thought it was fun. It was not something I was really expecting them to go so hard on. I was expecting it maybe to be like something that, because I didn't expect this to be 100% just flat time travel. I expected some sort of quantum reality dimensional thing where they would go in and they would have to, and so we'd be seeing other versions of things. And I thought that's how Professor Hulk was going to fit in. So that was a surprise to me, but it was a welcome surprise. And Mark Ruffalo did such a great job voicing him. And it was delightful in a way that Thor was not. This was a lot of fun. His interactions were really good. Down to when he's messing with the time machine, and they've screwed it up 3 times in a row, and then when they finally get Ant-Man back right, he claps and is, "Hey, time travel!" He he doesn't have a real arc in this, and that's okay. I also want to say that I think my favorite stuff from this film is when they go back to New York for the first Avengers and they have to send Hulk down the stairs.
Oh my God, yes. Stairs.
No more stairs.
Also, the bit when they first get there and like Professor Hulk is like making a dramatic show. Everything Hulk in the first Avengers flashback was like, yes, comedic gold.
Yes.
Yeah, turns out Mark Ruffalo is like a really talented performer, huh?
Who knew? This Mark Ruffalo guy might be something.
He was so darn entertaining. I felt like it was just because like based off of whatever they were trying to do with Bruce and Natasha, like in Ultron and whatever else, like I felt like it was great that they didn't not acknowledge it when she didn't come back and his specific feelings, what those would be, but they didn't harp on it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I felt like, man, this movie just really retconned the hell out of Ultron and Dark World. Huh?
We don't talk about that.
But yeah, I also found it funny that basically like the Zen state that he's in now, where you can like blend the two, is essentially where we left off, like the very end of another movie that we don't talk about, The Incredible Hulk, where it's like, oh yeah, that movie ends with this is boom, this is the balance. And then we just kind of don't go back to that. And it's like, oh, now he is this, and he's fun, and he's wearing sweaters, and it's great. So I'm looking forward to see how else they're able to like kind of keep that character going throughout other characters' movies, since they can't release their own standalone Hulk movie.
Right.
To me, didn't watching the Hulk, it didn't feel like it was like this is my arc, which all of the other characters had that like very blatantly feeling. But his whole thing has been like, I don't know how to live with this dude, like this, the split personality, the taking over. So to just finally see him like, yeah, man, we're living together. And I was like, that was it. That was the completion of the arc. He figured it out.
That is the Disney Plus multicam sitcom that I want to see. Is Bruce Banner and the Hulk being roommates, but they're just one being.
And look how happy he was. We never saw Bruce Banner, or the Hulk for that matter, but Bruce Banner happy. And in this movie, he's just happy all the time. And that's so nice.
I will say that my first reaction, I even like sent this to Nicole via text. I was like, Bruce Banner? ? Because I wasn't sure how I felt it, because it just felt so different or out of character. But it is truly just him being happy. And now that you're saying that, I'm looking back and I'm like, wow, that's sad. I didn't even recognize him. I was like, who is this happy person? But that's great for him. And because thinking about like how much comedy he brought in, it makes the Thor stuff even more infuriating. Like we didn't need
like,
any
you're
of
capable
those
of
jokes.
It.
Yeah.
there was plenty of humor, and also like you're capable of like doing humor that isn't garbage. So why did you do the humor that was garbage? Okay, so on the note of things that are garbage, I regretfully am going to have to collapse the last two Avengers into one thread, because I don't think there's any way not to. Like, I think we have to. Clint and Natasha. So, in the 5 years later, Natasha has basically, they don't ever name her this, but she has essentially become director of what remains of S.H.I.E.L.D. She's essentially the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. when we see her
or the director of the Avengers. We're not
director of the Avengers. Yeah. What exactly she's in charge of is unclear. The remains, the 50% remains of after the snap. She is now in charge of it. She is the leader, and she's weary, but she's doing the thing. She has, committed herself to like being the one to make sure that they're still in the fight. Clint we see his family dust away. Like that's Clint was absent from Infinity War. And so the first time that we see him in this world is him just hanging out with his family. And then he turns around and they all disappear. And in the 5 years later, he has gone off to be a like vigilante. Basically, he's just running around murdering everybody who he thinks is bad.
Apparently, only Japanese criminals.
No, he started. The first was a Mexican cartel.
Oh, was it? I don't. For some reason, I thought I heard
yeah.
triads with that too, and I was like,
No.
What happened with the triads?
No, he's an international vigilante, so once they come up with a plan, once they start making this time heist thing happen, Nat goes off to find him and bring him back into the fold and become part of the time heist. And in the time heist, the two of them are sent off to retrieve the Soul Stone. When they arrive at the point of the Soul Stone, they were inexplicably not informed by the other two members of the team who knew about the Soul Stone how the fuck you get the Soul Stone.
I don't think they knew.
Nebula knew.
Did she know exactly?
Nebula and Tony both should have known because they were there when Thanos said.
Good point. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So they both know how Thanos got the stone. So why neither one of them, let anybody know in this rundown of the plan? Whatever. I'm already answering the questions about how I felt about this. So they have to get the Soul Stone, and they have a whole big fight about which one of them is going to die to get the Soul Stone. And in their fight, eventually Nat just pushes off and kills herself to get the stone. And so then Clint gets the stone. He goes back. There's multiple scenes of all white men after they killed the only girl, the token lady from the original 6. And I don't know, Clint is just generally there from that point forward. There's literally no reason that Nat couldn't have also been the one who was there. And then at the end, Clint, after spending 5 years as a fucking vigilante, happily returns to be a family man with his newly undusted family. Shrug.
I have a lot that I can't say because we'll be here all day.
Right. Yes.
Look, I struggle with this. Is something where normally I'm pretty good at saying, no, this is bad, or I didn't like this. Like those two things are often at odds, right? And a lot of people say that movie's bad when what they really mean is I didn't like that movie.
Right.
I can't tell if this stuff with Natasha is bad or if she is my favorite character in all of this. She has been my favorite character. And I was so upset, and not upset in a like, oh, I'm sad this character died, and like when Buffy had to kill Angel. Like it isn't that kind of sad. I was really genuinely upset at the storytellers because it felt wrong, and I can't tell if it was done badly or if I just didn't like it. I honestly can't. So I'm gonna have to let you guys talk about it more because I don't know. I don't really give a shit about Hawkeye. Kind of liked him in Age of Ultron, and that's about it.
Yeah, he's definitely the one I care least about.
And I think that's maybe what I think it came down to is the writers just kind of getting cute, and because they've done such a not even a bad job with Hawkeye throughout this entire series. They've done no job with Hawkeye throughout this entire series. That I think they were pulling an okie doke in that, like, oh, well, basically Hawkeye is just fodder at this point. And so people would be expecting us to sacrifice Hawkeye. But, and there's also the Black Widow movie coming out later. So Scarlett's going to be fine. I hate to say it, but like I feel like that's kind of what it came down to, and that's just also maybe because I watch too much wrestling, and wrestling writers try to get too cute about stuff that might be predictable because they read the internet too much.
Yeah,
not to justify it, but I think that's just what happened.
I really hated it. So I've heard multiple people say this to me now, but it's almost like Black Widow was never treated particularly well by this franchise. So it's almost like, okay, you went there too. Like I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed, Marvel, that you chose to go this route. It was, she was for so long the token lady, and then to get it back down to the original with some extras and then kill her off felt like it kind of transcends this argument of like, was it bad or is it just not enjoyable? Like now this is like a weird thing that you're doing, like in terms of representation and what the message of your story. Now you're getting into territory where I just feel uncomfortable with your storytelling.
Yeah, I agree.
And there were, even apart from like the larger things of like who Natasha is and what she represents in this group of white men, basically, I also just felt really icky about like her whole thing was like she was leading S.H.I.E.L.D. for so long. She was like super lonely and all of this stuff. And then it almost to me felt like the story was giving Clint more importance because he has a family and he's a family man. And like, I don't like, as a single person with no family, I'm like, you know what? Fuck you. You can add a lot of value and be important and not have children. And so the fact that it was like, but you go back and take your family, and that was like where the important was, didn't feel good to me either. And I don't think that this was necessarily the completion of her story. And I know whatever comes next, like whatever. But for the purpose of like this movie and what we know right now, it didn't feel satisfying to me, as we keep talking about, like for her arc. And I hated it.
On that note, too, about like Clint versus Natasha, it also bothered me because this movie reduced it to a soul for a soul, whereas in the last movie, Thanos was told like it was, who you love most. There's also a level on which Natasha is only Clint's number one because 3 other people that he loves more than her got dusted. Whereas, like, I buy the argument that her friend Clint is her number one.
Yeah,
like
I agree with that.
Tracks. Like, that makes emotional sense to me. It's honestly part of why, like, the whole Natasha Bruce relationship in Ultron was sort of like garbage and nonsense. And so, like, the idea that he would actually be the one that she cares most about, makes a kind of sense to me. There's just like so many levels on which it bothers me. But I generally agree with everything that Mari is saying, that like at this point, this series has done so much poorly in terms of representation. And so to make the decision to do this thing in this way, to me, goes above and beyond any sort of questions about like, is this good? And I think the idea of like, oh, we didn't kill Clint because that's the one that you were expecting it to be. Like, that's fucking stupid. And like this is like this to me goes back to a lot of my nonchalant attitude towards spoilers. Like, if that's the whole thing, if like you like, if this only works because I wasn't expecting it, and like when I watch it again and I'm expecting it, it no longer works, then like that's bad. I don't think that's good storytelling.
I also want to jump off one thing you said there, which I agree with and want to magnify, which I do think is bad and is not just something I didn't like, but the idea of a sacrifice and the idea of like Thanos had to kill something. Hawkeye didn't murder her. He didn't trade a soul for a soul. Like, and their whole conflict there was, which is also something I didn't appreciate, was like that we're in a race to see who can commit suicide first. Yep. And I didn't like any of that. And I do think it's bad. And I do think that it changed the rules a little bit of the internal logic of the movie. Like, you want to tell me
us to the death of your main female character. You're changing the rules is just to get us to this point where you show us the dead and broken body of your main female character.
Yep. And the thing about that is, so again, if you build in the fact that Tony and Nebula should have like warned them that this was coming, absolutely, the way this should have gone down, one is Clint is the one who should have died, and two, like they're on their like their journey to the place of the Soul Stone, that was, when it got down to the point of just the two of them in that spaceship, and then they hiked up all the rocks. Like, they spent a lot of time together off screen, but like a lot of time together, just the two of them in their sort of final moments. And like that could have been off screen. Like, we don't really need to show it. We just have them having the conversation. And then we get to the moment of like, okay, now this is, then you like actually have the emotionally loaded moment of like, Nat has to push him, like I just, that it like upsets me deep in my core that is not what we were given, because like 100% that's what we should have been given. And like the other sort of infuriating piece in all of this was that at the end we get a funeral for just Tony Stark. Are you fucking with me? Like, the idea that we don't do anything, like the only memorializing that we get for the only, what was for quite some time the only female Avenger is a bunch of is five sad white men sitting on a dock, and like that's it. Like, they're like we got a minute of them showing off their complete lack of diversity with them being sad for 60 seconds, and then that's it. Like, then we just move forward, and that's all she gets, and she's not part of the big funeral, even though this is her end in precisely the same way that it is Tony's. And like that, gross.
And this is where I turned on the film.
Yeah.
This is the moment in the theater where I was like, now I'm not being told a story anymore. Now I'm looking at this as almost like a presentation, and I have turned on the presenter, and I'm like, okay, something is wrong, and now I'm trying to figure it out. And so instead of really taking in the rest of the film, and I would say that's probably the halfway point.
It's a little further than that, but sure. Yeah.
It's a 3-hour movie. Who knows? But
yeah.
But like it was at that moment that it's like, this film has to do a lot to win me back to be actually being in the movie again, and it never did.
I like could not sit still for a couple minutes. Like, I was like fidgeting in my seat. I was so angry after they kill her. But to this point about like talking about, the rest of the movie, there are a lot of other things going on here besides the individual stories of all of these Avengers. And I think like I want to open this up now for like anything that we haven't really talked about. I mean, Ant-Man, I think, is probably the biggest player that we haven't talked about up to this point. I saw our friend Valerie tweeted that watching Endgame made them want to see an Ant-Man movie, which I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I totally get that. He was also, I think, a mostly delightful presence in this movie. And yeah, I don't know, any other sort of big points that you guys want to hit on that we haven't covered so far?
That was a fun thing to start seeing throughout the weekend, was a lot of people going like, oh shit, I should have seen those Ant-Man movies, huh?
Yeah. Because truly, everyone was always like, you can skip those.
Right. I guess you could skip them up until the post-credit scene of the Ant-Man and the Wasp. Yeah, I thought Paul Rudd, again, like not in the first in Infinity War, got to, he got room to do Paul Rudd things, and it fit in very well, especially like when you have to try to justify and explain something as doomed in all media as time travel is. At least it's going to come from just a linorama of Paul Rudd and Chris Evans just like naming off different like time travel things, and again, and also just the whole time travel thing. Yeah, it's boy oh boy, just stay away from it at all costs. But if you have to do it, I guess name every time travel thing ever and then just try and get it over people's head. Because I think in the comics, one of the things that kind of helps solve this whole Infinity Stones debacle is like a cosmic like deity type of being,
Adam Warlock.
And Adam, there we go.
Yeah.
And I could see there being an argument made for like it being a little too much to ask, too hokey. Like, people know time travel. People are fine with time travel as long as we just over explain it enough to where they're like, fuck it, give me what I want, we'll be fine.
But also they gave it like a sort of like meta explanation with all the movies, which I don't know. I appreciated. There is like all of the things that you have to accept, the things that like don't make sense on which superhero movies are built. I don't know. I think the time travel thing is going to be hit or miss for a lot of people because it definitely does not hold up if you think about it too much. But
never does.
It never does. And I appreciated like their sort of approach of acknowledging, like they set up their basic rule right away of your past is now your future, like that, like that's okay, cool, like that's the baseline, that's really all you need to know, and like don't think about it too hard after that. I don't know, I understand why the fact that if you think about it too hard it doesn't work is going to be a problem for people. It definitely wasn't for me. I was like, cool, great, you gave Steve his happy ending, so I don't care.
I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but probably the one thing I'm taking with me the most from this movie is I thought the way that they basically gave us a fully alive Loki was clever, and I'm there for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I thought that
Disney
was
Plus, baby.
That was great.
Yes.
I was so happy with how that worked out, and I was not expecting it. The other thing that I want to talk about really quickly is something that I've just been starting to think about really in the last day since I've seen this, and something that's bothering me in a lot of media. And it really got on my nerves that the Avengers' eventual plan, really, or their eventual thing is who can get to the big gun. Like this is the whole thing, is like we are in an arms race, and who gets the Infinity Gauntlet, who gets all of the Infinity Stones. Well, I'm going to turn you to ash. No, I'm going to turn you to ash, and that is upsetting to me for a lot of reasons. We don't have to tell hero stories that way. Star Wars has managed to not do it. I remember there was a conversation I saw online a while back where people's like, the Rebels wouldn't have this issue if they just built their own Death Star. And the point being is the Rebels and the Galactic Republic don't act that way. That's not within their makeup. The idea is not fear and destruction that governs. And so far, all 8 Star Wars films have held on to that there is there's a difference in methodology, a difference in morality. And it bothered me in this in a way that a lot of these films haven't, even though I'm sure if I go back and look, it'll be present there. But that really upset me. And I'm coming to a place where I really believe that the stories we tell matter in how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the wider world. And so there was just something gnawing at me by the end of this that I was just like, I understand that Thanos and his army are gone, and I know that that's probably a good. I really don't like how it happened, and I know I'm supposed to feel good about it, but I don't. So
I think it's interesting too, because the big thing at the end of Infinity War was the snap, right? And then you get here and you're like, 2 more snaps, baby, and you're like, okay, now you're getting out of control.
And now it's just basically West Side Story, and who's to say what's happening?
I have a couple of things. So one is that I'm just sad from a perspective of like moving on and some of these characters that won't be on our screens anymore, supposedly or whatnot. But there were a lot of ways that this movie, for as little as the roles were, made me excited about some of like the new class of what's coming up. Like when Peter Parker showed back up, and every moment with him when he was like, I know his like little freak out over Tony's death was, very childish of him, but he is a child. But when he was like, Mr. Stark, Mr. Stark.
I wasn't saying that as a criticism.
I
thought that was accurate.
Yeah, totally.
So he was just so wonderful in all of his little interactions, and I really enjoyed him. We saw Scarlet Witch come back, and that moment where she was facing off against Thanos, even though she didn't quite get to the end. None of these people were going to kill Thanos. We knew that.
Right.
But
the fact that the only two who actually could like sustain them, there were three people who actually like held their own against him one-on-one for like a properly extended period of time, and they were Captain America, Scarlet Witch, and Captain Marvel. So like that, yes.
So in general, just seeing all of these people even show up for a little while made me excited. It was funny because one of my thoughts when we saw Doctor Strange show up, I was like, oh, I guess the reason why we needed Tony Stark number 2 is because Tony Stark is gone. We got a backup.
Straight up theory. There were more than one ways to win, and Doctor Strange omitted that because he knew he had to be the only one with bad facial hair. And so he's like,
I'm
not the one that has Tony
There could be only one.
Yeah.
My quibbles, I guess, are along the same lines in terms of like, I get why we didn't have more of them. It wasn't their story, but the way that they kept like Captain Marvel at arm's length, and the way I just felt like some of the stuff in Captain Marvel's own movie and some of like the advertising in between made me feel like she was going to have a bigger role. And she was just, I mean, I get it. There are other planets. She's doing her thing, but that felt like an excuse to not have her there. And I wanted to see her like do something more, and she didn't. And
I will say I like bought, and I did appreciate. So on the one hand, I agree that I definitely wanted more of her in it, but I don't know. I was on board with like, okay, you need to make up a reason for her to be gone. And that reason is going to be that this entire team of people is handling Earth, and she is off handling like thousands of planets by herself. I don't know.
And at the last moment,
like,
it's like, is that
fine.
Captain Marvel's music I hear?
yeah.
Like 100% don't understand why we didn't like call her sooner. Like I
don't
get that
get
she was
it.
like, you're not going to hear from me for a while, but like also, yo, Carol, we about to undo the snap.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
Also-
that's a phone call that should have been made.
Yeah, also, we have iPhones now. Get rid of that pager. Something.
I don't know. She reminded me of Tony Stark too much in this movie. I guess. Yeah. I don't like him, and I don't like her. There is something about both of them that it's like, would you just stop and listen to everybody else for 5 seconds? And so, because like there is a thing of like, we're about to go time traveling across the cosmos. And we've got one shot at it, and it's like, I get why they have to come up with this reason for her to not be there, but I don't know. It did not work for me.
To me, that felt more like a writing thing versus a Captain Marvel thing. Like that, they kept her away purposefully in the writing, and I wasn't and I guess the reason is because she's powerful, and this wasn't her battle to win.
Well, and it was a lazy justification for it, like to just. I gotta do the rest of the stuff. Bye.
Yeah,
it's like, well, at least give us some scenes of that or something. Like,
right. Show us what you're
show
doing.
us her like having to like double fist 2 planets or something like that. I don't know. Like, yeah, she was just straight up off screen.
My other quibble or whatnot, and I guess hope for the future. I don't know. We talked about how Infinity War with the snap, basically, not all of it, but it got rid of most of the diversity that the MCU had introduced over the span of it. And that was no more clear to me than at the end when Doctor Strange and all of the people are opening up like the portals for them to walk in. And I'm like, oh, there are all
There's
the black
the
people.
diversity.
Yeah. Like, oh my God. It was such a visual like punch to see like most of the women women and most of the people of color like walk out. And I was just like, oh my God. I don't know. We knew it happened, but the visual representation of it was like not fun. On the other hand of that, I'm excited for more Black Panther, and the handoff of the shield of Captain America to a black man was also like really, really emotional to me when he was like, you know, just accepting it and looking down. And he's like, you're the new Captain America. I thought that was a really, really great moment just in terms of representation. And for all the MCU has done bad here, I still have hope that they can continue to get better and do better. And that is fully recognizing that all of this like bullshit with like the first openly gay character was a throwaway.
God. Oh, Jesus Christ.
That was another one of the early moments that like lost me. So there's a brief in the 5 years, Steve is like a grief counselor basically. And in his little, you know, grief circle, one of the Russo brothers shows up to talk about how he went on a date with another man. And like, it is insulting that, you know, for 22 movies, like your queer audience has been saying, hey, we would like to be represented in your dang movies. And like, they're like, oh yeah, we did the first openly queer character in this way, was such a throwaway. And their reason for it, he's like, yeah, like it had to be one of us so that we could be sure it was like done right. It's all the more insulting. I like felt spit on by the movie in that moment.
I did not realize that was like the backstory behind that. Jesus.
Yep. Don't you feel even grosser about it now that you know that?
Well, I had heard like in the theater, there were like audibles like, oh, this, and I was like, what? And like, I like to think that that's why like that person had that backstory of just like, here it is. Yeah,
just a thing that people had heard about. Yeah, beforehand.
Yeah, and it wasn't like it even is. When I saw it in the theater, I was kind of like, huh, well, that's interesting. It's Joe Russo. and it's like, oh, yeah, and he's out on a date with a guy. And I didn't think about it much until afterward. And then I just happened to see a bunch of the posts on Twitter about Marvel sort of patting themselves on the back for it. And that's when I got like, are you fucking kidding me? You think you're heroes for this? Whoa.
Yeah. I was trying to be positive and said that I had hope for the future, and then I remembered that bit. So
I mean, you know, like there is reason for optimism. Like there is reason to like not assume the worst. But also, you know, there's a real history of wrongdoing too. You know, like that's both can be true. It can both be true that they fucked up a lot, and also that like I'm willing to give them more chances to not keep fucking up. Something else that I saw someone complain about, or I saw someone express an unease with the fact that like Nebula had to murder her past self. And I think I'm of two minds of this. One, we see two women kill themselves in this movie. And so that's
oh my God. I didn't think of oh, Jesus Christ.
So like there's that level on which this is definitely a bad. On the other hand, I also have a feeling like that scene doesn't bother me in the way that the Black Widow scene does. I think there's a way in which it tracks with Nebula.
Yes.
And like, and also I think it's worth noting that this movie manages to give us Gamora back, but it gives us back basically a Gamora right before everything we watched Gamora go through. It gives us a reset Gamora, and yet in that moment Gamora could not do it, and so like that's a worthwhile sort of thing. And Nebula, like her character is dark. Like this is just a really dark character, and I think like the metaphorical sort of thing of like her killing her past self, like there's something there that
was
like,
not there with Nat.
Yes, correct. And like it's not there, and so in that respect, like it worked for me, but also I understand why anyone would look at that and go, "Wow, this is the second time we had to watch a female character fucking kill herself in this movie." Could look at that and like be bothered by it and like not have it sit well with them. So I don't know. I'm like of conflicted feelings about that.
I think it's definitely all of the out of story things that make it worse. Like you could probably, like you said, it tracks with Nebula's character in that entire idea of her killing her past self, and of, you know, that whole thing that felt okay, but it was in context of like, hey, 3 main women like survived the snap and 2 of them kill themselves.
Right.
That like that's the out of story thing where you're like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So we already kind of started hinting at this, but I would like to kind of end all of this with a like discussion about where we think we're headed. So I don't know. Our plan was always that we would end this sort of podcast series on this note. Like, we're not necessarily planning on talking about all of the future movies on the podcast, but I am curious about this is maybe a little bit of time for me to have like my fanfic corner. Like, I'm curious about places that you think this is going. Like, what are your predictions now that we've gotten to this moment?
Well, and to be clear, Nicole said that we're not going to be talking about the future movies on podcast, but we will be talking about them in emails. You're not invited, and they're going to be excellent.
We'll probably cover them on the podcast.
Okay, I'm not committing to that at this moment.
In the future, all I kind of really care about at this moment is that Ryan Coogler is doing Black Panther 2. That's kind of just where I'm at. Like, he didn't keep on with Creed, and Creed 2 was not great, despite having gone to college with someone who wrote on that movie, and I don't like to talk about it out loud, but here I am on a public platform talking about it. But yes, but he is sticking with Black Panther, and I go where Ryan Coogler goes. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
I also think we're going to be doing a lot of space stuff, which I'm not super jazzed about.
Yes, that seems like the way forward. After you have this incredibly epic hero on Earth, like, honestly, it's hard to see how you go forward. It is interesting that the next standalone is Spider-Man. Like, I think the Spider-Man Far From Home is probably going to serve a little bit of the same function as the first Ant-Man movie did, and that, like, this is our come down. This is so after, like, the big epic thing. You know, we're now going to tell you, like, the smaller story of this high school kid, and I like that kind of makes sense to me. But also, we gotta go out to space in order to like continue after that moment. I am personally, this is, I'm the only one, but I gotta, throw it out there. I am interested to see what S.H.I.E.L.D. does with the post unsnap world. We had a very long season break for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It lives on.
Holy shit, are you serious?
Watched by me and me alone. Well, clearly me and somebody else, because they keep renewing it.
Somebody.
So
I had no idea.
And okay, but here's the thing. Here's why I am most interested in it, because I got the thing. I was having a conversation about this movie earlier that like got away from me because I started talking about the logistics of the snap. And I was like, because clearly it seems like all of Peter's friends are like also got snapped and then unsnapped with him, right? In order for like his story to make sense. But like, so the deal is that like Peter is now, he like lost 5 years time. So everybody who was born the same year as him, but didn't get snapped is 5 years older than him. And like, that's wild and weird.
Yeah.
But like, there's something about that story that I think is much too like, it's interesting. The Leftovers is a thing that existed. And so it's interesting, but it's also in a lot of ways too small of a story for me to see the MCU really doing anything with it. But it is totally the kind of thing that makes sense on S.H.I.E.L.D. Like that is my great hope. It's my joke, my like, I don't know, thinking through the logistics of it. It seems like Thanos has a particular grudge against New York, and like maybe New York lost like 80% of its population, but then like Kansas only lost like 20%, like there was some uneven distribution in this snap unsnap scenario. So I don't know. That's my one little aside. Also, I remain super excited to see what happens with Captain Marvel, because unlike Nick, I love her.
I love the Peter Parker thing because there's a potential that basically half of all students everywhere just got held back 5 years.
Yeah, right?
And also, even for adults, like if you got snapped, like your taxes are fucked.
Right, like there's just so many things going on there that I honestly do not expect the movies to actually confront. Like this idea that half, and like the half that didn't get snapped, right? Like they lived through that trauma. Like that is also like they don't get back those 5 years of their lives.
How many
just because
castaway scenarios? How many castaway scenarios are there?
Right.
I also, when you said S.H.I.E.L.D., it took me like a solid 3 seconds to be like, no, but I thought S.H.I.E.L.D. was...
No, that's fair. And I'm glad that I'm glad we captured that moment though on the podcast, because that everyone listening to the podcast is also like I'm sure they were right there with you.
I guess for me, I don't really know where it's going to go. I guess I think I agree with Rich that there's going to be more cosmic stuff. And I'm okay with that. On second viewing, really enjoyed the two Guardians movies more than I remembered enjoying them the first time. So I don't mind. I like the idea that the Guardians are going to get Thor. That actually sounds kind of fun to me. But I got to be honest, and I feel weird saying this, I kind of don't care. This movie, in a lot of respects, kind of broke my back. There is nothing that I'm really hyped to go see in the theater. I don't know why. I don't know what there was. There were so many things about this that really brought me down. I don't know. Maybe in a week I'll feel better, but.
It's also worth noting, though, that you expressed a similar sentiment in a different place, though, that you were ready to just have this be an end.
That's true.
A less bleak, I know right now you're in your feels because you loved this all so very much, and then they did you wrong. But as your friend, I just want to remind you that you were also ready to let this be an ending.
And I think I am. And I don't think I'm looking at this in necessarily a cynical way as much as I am just I'm tired. Of a lot of this.
Much like Steve and Tony.
Yeah.
You can rest now, Nick.
Yeah.
They'll be fine.
That was such a fun thing to see as well when they go back to 2012 and just looking at the 2012 Robert Downey Jr. versus the gray-haired 2023 Robert Downey Jr. But yeah, even from someone who enjoyed the movie thoroughly, I feel like I feel good about it. I'm fine not seeing another one. I will, because they gotcha. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm glad you said it. But it was a closure the likes that we're not used to getting, because everything is made to propel the next installment of the franchise. That's every freaking movie now. And I'm going to see Fast and Furious movies until I'm 80, and I'm fine with it.
But the thing is, this is intended to be an end, right? The whole thing with this too is that this is the first one that didn't have a post-credit scene, right?
Yep.
Because the message is, this is the closing of a chapter. And so, for anybody who's ready to be done, this can be your end.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
This is your out. They're giving you an out.
They gave me my out, and I'm walking away.
I'm taking a break, but I'll be trashed right along with everybody else. And more Black Panther. Give it to me, Captain Marvel. I'm here. I'll even watch that Scarlet Witch TV show. Let's do it.
Hell yeah.
Trash all the way.
The last thing, and this is something that a buddy brought up to me. I didn't even think about it because I was so swept up at the time. I'm just just give me what I want. How did all of Thanos' army get to 2023 with no time juice?
No, you can't think about that. You can't. Yep. You can't.
And that's what I told him. But
this is what I said before. Yeah. Either that's going to be a problem for you, or it's not. But you can't think about it. It does not hold up to scrutiny.
That's what I tried to tell him, and he's just like, but how?
Because if you think about that, then you could think about Black Widow and Hawkeye just basically saying, oh, we're going to jump to another time where the Soul Stone is not here. And then we'll get it there.
Endgame.
This sounds like a terrible game.
I don't want to play.
No.
On that note, this brings us to the end of this episode of the podcast and our Marvel Cinematic Universe journey. Thank you to Nick and Rich for going on this very long journey with us, and to all of you for listening. If you are enjoying this podcast, we would love and appreciate if you joined our community on Patreon, where we've got some bonus content and polls to vote on future podcast media. You can find out more at patreon.com/SnarkSquad. We would love to hear all of your thoughts on the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Avengers Endgame. You can find a post dedicated to this episode, as well as any show notes, notes at snarksquad.com, or you can find us on Twitter at snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
You can find my podcast at Real Bad Pod, or just me on Twitter at NG Jenkins.
And you can find me on Twitter at Rich Cammy. If you're ever in Chicago, hey, I could point you in the way of some good shows. The ones that I'm not necessarily even in.
Thank you, as always, to Stefan Chin for the theme music that is playing us out right now. And we will be back in your podcast feed again next week. Bye.
Bye.